it. I just had like, my private thoughts about it. I, would imagine a different type of relationship and just like soothe myself in that way. And even that, like even the idea of trying to change what this relationship was in my imagination has also played out in my relationships until I decided to heal. And I say that because a lot of times, if I was in a relationship where I wasn't feeling satisfied or I was unfulfilled or whatever it was, like in my mind, I would imagine that, like this wasn't as bad as it was, or it was going to get better, or this person, I can see like all this potential here, and I'm just going to imagine that he is who I need him to be when really he's not. You know what I mean? So like all of that played a role in how I presented myself and how I showed up and what I accepted in relationships.
Hello. Welcome to the Oasis Space, where we empower you to transform conflict into peace. I am your host, Patrice Grimes, also known as the Peace Creator, and I just want to welcome you all back for another episode. If this is your first time joining us in the Oasis Space, welcome. You are now officially a peace pursuit, and we're ecstatic to have you here. If you are not aware of what we believe peace to be, in this community, we believe that peace is a term that I've coined as an acronym as being able to pivot even as chaos ensues. Because we realize that conflict is not just an argument between two people, a disagreement, things of that nature. Conflict shows up internally and externally, and we discuss how it shows up particularly in our professions and personal relationships. So I utilize this platform to really encourage compassionate and courageous conversations and provide alternative perspectives that ultimately aid you in fearlessly embracing your authentic identity. So, even though I am known as the Peace Creator, another term that I like to affectionately use for myself is being a conflict communicator concierge, right? So as a concierge, we know that those people typically provide guidance, they provide assistance, they are an excellent resource for the information that you need. But separately, sometimes if they have other people that can answer and provide additional value, even the more, they connect you to those people, right? And that's ultimately what I intend to do in the Oasis Space. I don't believe that I know it all, but I do believe that I have excellent network of people that can provide value to you all in this space. And that's exactly what I intend to do. Again, with this episode, right? So today I am being blessed with none other than Miss Bernadette Jackson. And let me tell you all, you are going to get so much from this episode as we talk about transforming conflict to peace in our personal relationships, particularly as it pertains to our relationships with our Father. That's right, y'all. I know this is a topic that, it's always going to be timely because it is this perception on daddy-daughter relationships or just fatherless relationships in general that I think sometimes can get a bad rep, right? But we want to provide some clarity so that you can transform the conflict that you may be experiencing into peace in your lives. So a little bit about Bernadette. Bernadette Jackson is a woman of faith, a mom, a fatherless daughter, and a transparent truth teller. As a relationship engagement strategist and your favorite fear investigator, she creates safe spaces for fatherless daughters to learn, grow, and heal. Her safe spaces include the Bernadette Jackson podcast, where she is redefining how the world views women with daddy issues. Her, and that's an acronym HER Coalition, her private Facebook community, and Her Way Relationship Intensive, her private coaching program. Those are all ways that you can identify and work with her in these safe spaces. In the program, Bernadette teaches clients everything she wished she knew about attracting and maintaining amazing relationships as a fatherless daughter. This program is near and dear to Bernadette's heart as she openly shares how her own fear of abandonment cycle kept her in undesirable relationships for more than a decade. To learn more about Bernadette's story and how she can help, you can visit her or follow her on Instagram at Bernadette Jackson. And I will also include the link in the show notes. Okay? So without further ado, I'd love to welcome you all into the Oasis space with Miss Bernadette Jackson. All right, you all. I am here with none other than Miss Bernadette Jackson. Listen, I could probably give y'all so many accolades about this woman to start off, but I don't need to do it because I already know what she says is going to speak for itself. I mean, this is such an important conversation that we're having. It's one that is, it's been affecting us for time and time and time over and over the years. It's something that is not going away. And as we talk about transforming conflict into peace in our personal relationships, I said, babe, we got to get to the root of this. Let's talk about some of the most important relationships that we have, which is the ones that start with our parents. And then for this conversation, the relationships we have with our fathers, or potentially the lack of, right? I think sometimes we have these experiences in our lives where the father is not present and it presents some conflict in our lives. And so I really wanted to talk about this and have Bernadette come in and speak to us on this topic, being that she is so well versed. She has such a wealth of knowledge. And I just thought it would be a good topic for us to discuss here in the Oasis space. So welcome, Bernadette, to the Oasis space.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So Bernadette, I want to dive right into it because again, I think this is such an important conversation, one that a lot of us like to sweep under the rug, right? We hear these things called the almost, it feels like a cliche term of having daddy issues, right? And people, you'll get offended by it, will get upset by it, and it's like, it's kind of this connotation, this negative connotation associated with having, quote, daddy issues. But I think it's an important conversation. It's one that is felt to be shamed, but it's the reality. It's the reality that a lot of people, particularly women, are facing in this country today. And so, I'd love to just understand from you, what made you want to help this population of women? And kind of what's your story?
Well, honestly, like it started with me. And because I'm a fatherless daughter, there is a lot that has happened with my experiences with my father, with men, with loved ones, with just familial relationships that I did not realize was because of what I thought about myself in relation to why my father wasn't there. And so my background is that I didn't meet my father in person until I was a freshman in college. And he lived about 3.5 hours away from me. So it wasn't as if, the distance was so great that he couldn't come. He just chose not to. And in my mind, like in my child's mind, I internalized it to be that something was wrong with me, that it was because I wasn't smart enough, I wasn't worthy, I didn't have any value, whatever the thing was that I thought at the time. That is the reason that I had given myself as to why my father would not ever make good on his word. Because we would have conversations sometimes, maybe about twice a year, where he would, talk to me about, wanting to see me, wanting to come and visit and all these things. And he never made good on that. And so for me, it was like, well, something must be wrong with me, why he doesn't want to. And the value or lack thereof that I placed on myself really carried through in my relationships, in what I thought I needed to do in order to be loved, in order to be looked upon as being valued, in order to just take up space. And
Mm.
so when I discovered that the roots of all of my misfortune in relationships and just, like how I came off, how I showed up, and what I accepted was because of this, limiting belief that I had that I didn't have any value because my father did not want to have a relationship with me or wasn't ever intentional about pursuing me in any way. It was an eye opener for me because
Mm.
it helped me to understand that because he was so emotionally unavailable, I then was accepting emotional unavailability as the norm in my relationships, all
Ooh.
the while craving something more, something deeper, something safer, and not understanding why I wasn't getting it, how to obtain it, or what to even do. So that's kind of where the work started. It started with me just needing to change, honestly.
Yeah. And it's so many things you said there that's good. And I kind of want to just even circle back because, from your perspective, right, you said you didn't meet your father until your freshman year of college. And from your perspective, it was just that you felt he chose not to. It wasn't that he couldn't.
Yeah.
He chose not to. You all were having a couple of conversations throughout the year where he would say he's going to meet you, but he's not. And so was it your understanding that he knew where you were, who you were, where you were located? It just, he was not coming to see you or to actually meet you at that time.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. The door was open. Anytime he called our house, and back then we had a house phone. It wasn't like we had a cell phone, He had our phone number. He knew our address. He had been there before, obviously, because, he and my mom were in a relationship at some point. And
Yeah.
so he just chose not to engage any further than these, empty promises that he would make when he would call every couple of months or twice a year at best.
Yeah.
So, it was very hard for me to understand as a child, like, why, if you said you were going to do something, you didn't do it. And then, like, what is it that about me that you don't want to have these relationships with me? It was hard.
Yeah. And I imagine, you likely would even ask questions to your mother that she could not answer for you. And so it made that even difficult to say, well, do you know why he's not showing up or what's happening here? He's saying he's coming, but then he's not. And I think that's a difficult position as well to be in, right?
I honestly, like, I feel like when I was younger, I was still like very intuitive. And
Mm.
so I actually never asked my mom why he didn't come. Like, why wasn't he showing up? I didn't do any of that because I feel like on some level, I knew that she didn't have the answer. And I think that I did not want to burden her with the grief that I felt, with the feelings that I had, with all this confusion and all of that. And so a lot of what I felt back then, I internalized it and I kept it to myself, which are two things that, are not healthy, but that is the only way that I knew how to deal with it. I just had, like, my private thoughts about it. I, would imagine a different type of relationship and just like soothe myself in that way. And even that, like, even the idea of trying to change what this relationship was in my imagination has also played out in my relationships until I decided to heal. And I say that because a lot of times, if I was in a relationship where I wasn't feeling satisfied or I was unfulfilled or whatever it was, like, in my mind, I would imagine that, like, this wasn't as bad as it was, or it was going to get better, or this person, I can see like all this potential here, and I'm just going to imagine that he is who I need him to be when
Mm.
really he's not. You know what I mean? So, like, all of that played a role in how I presented myself and how I showed up and what I accepted in relationships, honestly.
Yeah. And when you even talk about that, right, when, you were having these conversations with your dad leading all the way up until your freshman year of college where you actually physically met him.
Mhm.
Up until that point, was there a period where you had given up and was like, I'm just never going to meet my dad, and I'm just going to accept that I'm not going to meet my dad? Was there ever the time period that you went through there?
I feel like at some point I had just decided that this was the norm and that I was not going to try to explain to myself like what was happening. And then what I ended up doing is just disassociating myself from the whole thing. Like that's really what I did. And
Mm-hmm.
so that caused me to be emotionally unavailable in relationships because disassociating from things that were uncomfortable for me
Yeah.
became the norm in how I handled situations with people. So it was like, oh, if somebody didn't want to be my friend anymore, or if I broke up with somebody, it was like, okay, like, I don't care, like, whatever. And I just would move on to the next thing very, very quickly. Like, I don't have time to be sitting up here trying to grieve over this. I'm moving on. I'm chucking the deuces. I'm out. Like, the next man is gonna, do what he needs to do.
Right. What's
All that.
Gucci said, miss one bus, next 15, one coming, right? It's that
Okay.
mentality, like,
Right.
you gone, another one coming, whatever. So
Right. And it's a trauma response. I didn't realize it at the time, but that's how I handled things. And
yeah,
so, it's just what I needed to do at the time. Like, I mean, it started off with me being a child and imagining like, what a relationship with him could be like, but then it just morphed into disassociation where it's like I pretended not to care because that is the only way that I could have gone through my life and deal with what I needed to deal with without having this constant burden of like, well, why doesn't he want to choose me? Like it
right.
was just easier for me to just, be numb to it.
That's so good. And even circling back to the piece where you say, you learn these behaviors and you realize, okay, this is just someone that, they're not going to keep their word. Did you even see that in your disassociation that either you were someone that maybe took it more seriously to keep your word on things, or you similarly adopted those behaviors of like, well, if he doesn't do it, then it's obviously not a big deal or whatever? Like, how did you see some of those traits play out for you? Like maybe you became more excessive with like, people need to keep their word. And if they don't, like you kind of fall apart, right? In your
Yeah.
relationships.
That's a really great question. And so for me, I am a stickler at keeping my word. Like I actually feel sick to my stomach
Mm,
if I say that I'm going to do something and then I don't, and then it somehow becomes like, something that like trickles into a whole situation that I didn't want it to trickle into. Like it's very hard for me to say that I'm going to do something and not be able to follow through with that. And so I take people keeping their word, being honest about things, and like just telling me exactly what it is
yeah,
very seriously. And
right.
so when I see situations where a person's story is always fluctuating, like there's always changes in what they're saying, that like the truth is just somehow abstract, and whatnot, and all of these things, like those are major red flags for me. And that's the kind of thing where I completely disengage almost immediately because it doesn't feel good to me. It's not a safe situation for me.
Mm.
And I can't get with it.
Yeah, yeah. That's such a good point, right? Just the whole safe space of it, right?
Mm.
But when we talk about, you've spoken about even how you disassociated and you realized that. Is that something you had recognized before meeting your dad? So I guess let's talk about when you actually met him. Like, what was that experience like? How was that first conversation? Like, what was it, something you quote prepared for? Like, did you almost like rehearse what you were going to say, or what was that like for you?
So when I did meet him, I did actually imagine what the first encounter was going to be like. I thought that it was going to be different than it was. I did not anticipate being as angry as I was during that first conversation. I thought that it was going to be like easy breezy and chill. And I was just going to like, be my normal self, which is very laid back, observing the situation and not actually telling people how I feel about things. Because again, I
Mm-hmm.
told you that that's how I dealt with stuff.
Right.
But during that conversation, like the
Mhm.
rage honestly just bubbled all the way up to the surface. And in conversation with him, I remember asking him why, like,
Yeah.
why did he never come?
Hmm.
Why did he never try to have a relationship with me?
Yeah.
And his response was, and I'll never forget this, his response was that he didn't know. And I'm gonna tell you right now, like, I could handle the not knowing because I hadn't known all my life. But
Yeah.
him, like, telling me that he didn't know
Yeah.
why he chose not to be a father to me, like, that really shattered my
Mm.
entire world. And I was a freshman in college at that. So it was like, I'm in a new environment.
Yeah.
My mom is not here. I have to navigate adulting for the first time. And now it's like, my father is telling me that all of the things that have caused the unworthiness that I felt,
Mm.
he didn't know why he did it.
Yeah.
It was really hard.
Mm. Mm. And I know it's still hard.
Yeah.
It's still hard. Even as we're having the conversation, I can tell it's emotional. You still feel it. Like say, it's something you don't forget for someone to not
Yeah.
have a reason. Um, and I guess what I would ask for that, right? You went in, you said, well, why, what is the reason? And it's not a response that you feel is adequate enough, right?
Right.
Um, at what point did you continue to try to build a relationship with him after, or was it just like, okay, I've gotten the answer and now I have to just, because at some point, right, you said you decide I had to heal. You
Yeah.
recognize that it was rolling over into other parts of your relationships. So what was this moment for you that you realized, okay, this is likely the source of how it's affecting other relationships? What am I going to do to change it? What was the pivotal moment for you at that?
Okay. So I'm gonna just go back just a little bit to the first question you asked in terms of like, what was the relationship like after that? And
Mm-hmm.
we did definitely try to have a relationship. He would bring me around more. I met my brother and my sister and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to kind of be integrated a little bit in my father's side of the family and whatnot. Our relationship was not father daughter. It was more like, I'm getting to know you as a friend and then we'll see kind of situation. And there was definitely a lot of a learning curve there. And, I have just learned with the ebbs and flows of the relationship with my father, even now at my age, that he just doesn't have the capacity. And
Yeah.
I've had to learn that. And that came to me like in my healing journey. So I will let you know exactly what caused me to finally decide that enough was enough with how I was dealing with things and just, being unhealed. And it was that I was alone on my birthday. And I want to say maybe I was in my early 30s. I can't remember exactly which one it was, but I was alone on my birthday and I had literally just broken up with the man that I thought that I was going to marry 3 days before. And it was hard because he and I had like a really close relationship. We were really cool. And we had a friendship outside of a romantic relationship. And I realized during our breakup that everything that he said he wanted, he actually didn't want. He was not emotionally ready for this kind of relationship that I was looking for.
Yeah.
And it had just clicked right then and there that I was tired of trying to convince people to be emotionally ready for something that they said that they were, or something that I wanted. I was just sick of doing that because it was a really great burden on me. I always felt like I had to be on, always had to be proving. I always had to be like creating an atmosphere that they would need me. It was a lot.
Oh.
And so when I broke up with him, I started to cry out to God because I was like, I'm here again. Like, I don't understand how many times, Lord, do I need to go through this. You know what I mean? Like,
Do I?
let's have a conversation because how long? How long are we doing this? You know what I mean? Like how many cycles of this must I endure? And
Mm.
so it was like, he gathered me up because he was like, you're the common denominator in all of your failed relationships. Like, what did you think? And I was like, excuse me, first of all, like that was hard.
He'll come check you first. Like,
Very much so. Check me. Check me. And I was like, sir, that was not necessary. Okay. Like, we did not have to go there. I don't know why you thought that you needed to do that to me. But I sat with it and I was just like, okay, so if I'm the common denominator, that clearly means that I have to change. Like, I have to take ownership over what belongs to me. And what belongs to me is my response to what has happened. And all this time, I was under the impression that it was everybody else, it was not me. And although the relationships with people, there was definitely fault on the other side. I had to own what belonged to me.
Yeah.
And so in doing that, I became radical about trying to understand exactly what my issues were, like what was going on with me, what did my father loss mean to me, how was it presenting in my relationships, how did it affect me in ways that I didn't know. And I just took a deep dive for several years on that. And I call it the time where I was just in my lab. Like, I had my glasses on, I had my microscope out, and I was like, I'm looking at these cultures and I'm like, we're finna look at this thing and get to the bottom of it because like something needs to be done. And so it's like, okay, what's actually happening with me? Why is it happening? What can I do to change the trajectory? Like, what do I need to implement? And that was what I was on for years. And I recorded everything. I had my little notebook out. I had my hypothesis. I had my little, my research findings. I had my implementation plan. I had the whole thing. And I would I would learn a little bit about myself and I would find, some kind of solution that was out there. And then I would go and implement it in relationships with people. And some of it would work, some of it didn't. But I was just like, I was committed fully to understanding who I was, like to self-discovery, understanding what I needed, why I needed it, what was the root cause of, all of this hurt and pain that I had endured, but some of it by my own hand.
Yeah.
And in doing all of that, it really helped me to get to where I am now in terms of just the knowledge I have around this and my quest to really re-educate people around what a woman with daddy issues actually is, why she's that way, and what is the path forward. Because when I was doing this work, there was about one book, literally one. And it was hard to find at that. And when I did, I grasped that and it became almost a Bible for me because this was the only information that was geared specifically towards my circumstance that let me really kind of get a bird's eye view of what was going on from the perspective of someone who had lived through it and had also done the research, because it's just not widely researched or spoken about. Like, there's a lot of commentary about it. There's a lot of negative connotation around a woman with daddy issues. Like they speak about our demographic very harshly, but not and never from a place of compassion, never from a place of trying to understand how a woman could have gotten there. And so with the work that I do, like that's at the forefront of the work that I do, like just understanding how did you get here? Because if you understand how you got there, then you can understand what is your path forward.
That's so good. That's so good, Bernadette. Like you said, so many good things here. And I think, like you say, you've spent several years in this self-discovery phase of identifying, why do I need the things that I need in relationships? How do I advocate for myself in these relationships? And I think what's so interesting is because our stories is so closely related as far as our pivotal moments per
Right.
se, like literally down to it being around our birthdays. And I think that is so interesting, but even more so just the fact of, like you say, going into this idea of knowing like, okay, there are people at fault here, but girl, you the common denominator. What do I got to do?
Yeah.
What do I have to research? And when we talk about even just identifying some of the things that you realize were areas that you were emotionally disassociating yourself, where you would minimize things that were actually important to you, but you would make them less important, or you were imagining these relationships because you maybe were more in love with the potential than the actual person that was standing right in front of you.
Right.
What are, when you talk about it with your clients or things like that, what are some, I guess, identifiable signs that people can look for to recognize that they are actually emotionally disassociating themselves in situations or in these relationships? Because I think one of the things that I talk about is how we normalize conflict in our lives because, again, we make it seem as if, oh, well, this is something everyone's going through. Or if it's, this is something that I've always experienced, so it must be normal. But still realizing like, but this doesn't feel good internally to me.
Right.
Even though it's normal, it doesn't feel good. And so for you, you were going through this process of just emotionally disassociating from things that bothered you. Are there some specific signs that people can recognize within themselves to say, oh, I didn't realize that I was doing this, but I haven't been minimizing here, or I haven't been, speaking up. Is there something specific to look for?
Yeah, there's a few things that you can look for in your behavior that will be some kind of an indication that, you might need to explore what's going on there. And one of the things is having muted feelings about everything, because one of the misconceptions about disassociation and or numbing is that it's only the negative feelings that are going to be numbed. And that's not the case. Like what ends up happening is that, you have trained your brain to not want to deal with the emotions that you're having. And what your brain will do is that anytime you have a big emotion, positive or negative, it mutes it because it understands that you are unable to handle the magnitude of what those feelings are. And if your response is always to, try to shove it under the rug, try to stamp it down, try to ignore the feelings, I'm going to deal with it later or whatever, that's the response that your brain picks up on. And even in situations of joy, excitement, contentment, it is still going to push it down, stamp it down, and kind of, sweep it under the rug. And so if you notice that even in moments of excitement that you don't feel as excited as you feel you should, like other people around you are like super excited at your accomplishment. And you're like, yeah, it's nice.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like things like that, like very muted emotions is a very clear sign that you are emotionally unavailable, or you have a practice of disassociation with situations in general. And with that, then I would definitely say that you need to figure out what the root is. I mean, it may not be your lack of relationship with your father. It could be some other traumatic experience that you have had. But if your coping mechanism has been to ignore it and to sweep it under the rugs or to ignore your feelings about it, then that is going to manifest itself in every single situation and relationship that you have until you deal with that root and you start to learn new ways of coping with big emotions that you have. So that's the one thing that I would say about that. The second thing is being afraid or fearful of other people's big emotions. Like if it makes you wildly uncomfortable when somebody is crying or they're upset and it's not about you and you don't know how to soothe them, how to comfort them, you want to like up and leave because you're just like so uncomfortable with like their show of emotion, even if
Yeah.
it is that they're excited to see you and they come and they like, run up to you and they give you a hug and you feel like, startled and alarmed at how excited they are to see you. Like, I'm giving these examples because this is the kind of stuff that happens with people all the time. Like, stuff like that is cause for you to, start to look at how you've been handling things and whether or not, this is something that has carried over in your other relationships. Those are two really big examples. There are other ways that people numb their emotions. And I speak about this all the time. Like, anything that is a distraction from you dealing with the feelings that you have can be a trigger response to you wanting to like stamp down your feelings about something that has happened or not deal with it. And some people choose travel. Some people choose food. They choose sex. They choose serial monogamy. They choose like throwing themselves into church and being all things to everybody. They choose people pleasing. They choose, a number of things, like anything that you are using to distract yourself from dealing with something that needs to be handled and needs to be dealt with. That is you choosing an activity to numb your feelings or to distract yourself from what is maybe something that you can't handle right now. And we should really be honest about that, because some people don't have the capacity to deal with it. And that's very real.
Right.
And
Right.
but even in acknowledging that, like understanding that, hey, I don't have the capacity to deal with this right now, there should be a circling back to that thing. Because if there isn't, then what's going to happen is that then you're going to then come up with now the coping mechanisms. And again, your brain just being rewired to never dealing with emotionally heavy situations at all. And it just is a trickle down effect with everything and everyone that's in your life.
Right. 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 And I mean, that's such a good point, right? Because when we talk about these things, when you talk about how it shows up in behaviors, it trickles, and really, like when we talk about just being emotionally unavailable or just not being, I guess, aware of our emotions, that's definitely a way how conflict shows up internally, of how we perceive ourselves, how we perceive other people, whether or not we're comfortable addressing it with other people, how we're feeling, how we're addressing things we need, all of those things, right? And when you talk about even the coping mechanisms, I thought it was interesting when I had done a little research on this topic, and 1 in 3 children are without fathers in the home, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you talk about how some of the coping mechanisms, and this can be related to, I guess, other trauma responses too, but particularly as it relates to people that have fatherless homes, the things you hit on, that was number one indicators of self-esteem issues.
Mm-hmm.
They struggle to build or maintain relationships. They're more likely to have the eating disorders you talk about, like the overeating, or maybe it's the bulimia. They're not eating. More prone to depression. They're likely, like say, maybe go towards sexually active,
Mm-hmm.
more promiscuous, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And more susceptible to addiction, substance abuse, things like that. Now, what I thought was interesting, and I don't know if you have any insight into this, is that those 6 things were pretty common between men and women that grew up fatherlessly. In the male population, though, it seemed to have been more prevalent that they performed more poorly in school, and they maybe more prone to be incarcerated or commit suicide.
Okay.
I don't know if you've seen in your profession and the work you do, because I know you focus more on women, but have you seen that it does appear to affect women a little more than men in this space, or I guess in different ways?
What I would say to that is, because I do have some knowledge on, like how fatherlessness affects women in terms of like academics and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
it does adversely affect us. Studies show that kids, even up to adults who actively do not have a relationship with their father and there is some turmoil there, they do perform poorly in school. And
Mm,
that was one of the things that when I was doing my research had come up. And because I honestly, like, I've always been like a straight A student.
yeah.
I graduated like almost the top of my class in high school. I had like, all the things, okay, literally all the things. And then I went to college and it was almost like a nosedive in my studies, like the first 2 years. And I was trying to figure out, well, what on earth is going on? Like, this is not me. And I realized that my studies really declined almost right after I met my father. And just like, that turmoil, the initial conversation and everything that came up after that, it was really tough. And it was hard to reconcile because I started to like, question my level of intelligence and whatnot, like what's going on, and not realizing until years later, okay, this was the cause of that because it was so unlike me that I didn't know what on earth was going on. So that's definitely a thing. And it's something that parents are not even really aware of, to be honest with you. Like, they don't understand that some of the ways that you deal with grief is to just not be able to perform to your optimal level. And if that is like in school with a child, then you're thinking the child is lazy, you're thinking that like they just don't want to do their work or whatever it is, and all the while like they're depressed, or
Mm-hmm.
like they don't understand how to deal with these big emotions that they have.
Right.
And they're trying to cope as best they can. And so it can be very difficult for parents because they have that expectation that your child needs to be performing at a certain level. And when they don't, and they don't understand the reason, and they know what their child's potential is, like then it becomes this conflict now of, well, I don't understand why you're not doing what you used to do or what's expected of you. And then the child doesn't know how to articulate that they have all these big emotions about why their father isn't there. And so there's just this, there's this dynamic between um parent and child, and it causes a rift a lot of times. And this is also one of the reasons why one of the characteristics of a fatherless daughter, and I call these fatherless daughter trigger points, one of them is a complicated relationship with your mother. And this is one of the reasons why, because the expectation that they have there, a being a single parent, a lot of times is that you're going to need to do more than other children your age have to do.
Mm,
And
mm,
so now you are putting on your child a lot more emotional responsibility,
yeah.
whereas they don't have the opportunity to grieve, the lack of relationship with their father. They don't have an opportunity to be a child in the sense that, adult responsibilities are not placed on them. And there's all these other dynamics that they have to now be integrated into because
Mhm.
of your parent being a single parent and needing you to do more than a child who is in a two-parent home. So there's a lot there.
Yeah, yeah. And even when you talk about grief, right, I think is interesting because a lot of times people will translate and perceive grief to only be related to someone dying in their family
Yes.
without acknowledging that grief comes in many forms and it's just literally the psychological, sometimes psychological acknowledgement of a loss, right? A
Yeah.
loss of a relationship, the loss of the ending of a relationship or ending of a job even, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there are so many ways that grief shows up. And so like you
Right.
say, how important it is to even allow yourself to acknowledge and go through the process of recognizing that I'm a child that for whatever reason my father isn't as active or present that I would like them to be.
Mm-hmm.
How do I just kind of go through this process to accept what it is so that I can still be impactful, so that I can still show up how I need to, or like you say, sometimes just acknowledge that my studies are declining a little bit right now.
Yeah.
And this is a reason why. I think what's interesting is that, you were saying like you were always a straight A student, and the studies show that a lot of times people are adversely impacted to perform poorly. But I think the opposite could be that people perform so well because it's like you need to see me, right? It's this performance-based complexes of
Absolutely.
see me. Okay, well maybe will this, dad, if I get the straight A's, will this help you see me now?
Mm-hmm.
If I do this activity, if I'm singing in the choir, will this help you to see me? Will this make
Yeah.
you want to acknowledge me, right? And so it can go both ways where people just push and push and push themselves to the point where they then feel like I've got to do something to get people's acknowledgement or recognition, for them to see me, for them to hear me, for them to know that I matter, right? And I think that's such an interesting dynamic too, just to even realize how that shows up in performance when we are wanting to have some type of acknowledgement and acceptance from the people that are most important to us.
Right. And I just want to speak to that a little bit, because you're absolutely right. One of the reasons why I did so well in school is because I wanted to be considered a good child. Like, I did not want for my mother to look at me and say, oh, I don't have any value like my father did, because that's the thought that I have. And then she not want me anymore. So it's like, how in my little mind, how can I be a quote unquote good child so that I don't lose her love, so that I'm not abandoned by another parent or whatever it is. And so I did perform well. Like, I did all of the things that I needed to do. I never outwardly showed that I was a child doing anything that I wasn't supposed to do ever. Like, I stayed within my lines, I colored in the lines. I was not doing anything to rock the boat. So I completely get what you're saying there. And it was all very performative, because sometimes I would be like sick and tired of it. And my internal life, like, my inner life, my thoughts and stuff were like sometimes the complete opposite. Did I want to always be on? No. But did I feel like I needed to? I absolutely did, because I was fearful that I could lose anyone's love if I didn't show that I was valuable in some way. And for me, the only way I was able to do that was to be a straight A student, to, be active in church, to do what was told to me, and all of these things, like not to buck the system, none of that. I wasn't going to be out here like, with boys. I wasn't, going to show up pregnant. None of that was ever going to happen. Like, I was just like, I need to be exactly what my mother expects me to be, because that's the only way that I'm going to be able to keep her love. And so, like, I did that a lot. And, just circling back a little bit to my story, and that I imagined what conversations with my father would be like when I didn't have them. But when we actually had the conversation and he told me that he did not know why he did not want to have a relationship with me all that time, it kind of just shattered that imaginary world that I had created. And the imaginary world, honestly, is what kept me going. It's like, what kept me on that path. And as soon as it was shattered, and the reality of the situation was that this man had no reason whatsoever, it's like, okay, like, it just derailed like all of my thinking and my reasoning and my why, as to like, why I need to maintain a certain level of grades, or just as a persona, of who Bernadette needs to show up as in order to be loved and accepted. And so it was, it was hard. Like, it was just a complete mess for like several years.
Yeah. And I can imagine, because like you say, you have then created this world that almost validates why he wasn't around, right? And so in your world, you have created this excuse as to what is justifiable. Like, you've laid it all out. Well, I would understand if it's this. I would understand if it's that. I would understand if it's this, right? And when someone doesn't have this answer for you, you say, it shatters your world, right? And so when I talk, even like where it's so synonymous to that, what we're speaking about is when we talk about, when I talk about my clients with going through this unleashing the peace process, you are in this stage of comprehension where you're trying to identify from him what was the reason, right? I think of the Cardi B meme, what was the reason, or whatever.
Right.
And you don't get the answer, and that is a reality. It's a harsh reality.
Yeah.
When we're in conflict, particularly with two other people, and it's an internal conflict, but when it's external with someone else, we don't get the answer that we were hoping for. And it's like, well, how do we then get out of this cycle? How do we still then empower ourselves to break out of this cycle so that we are not still hurting? So we're not of this pain. So we're not experiencing this, still the emotional dissociation, the rejection, the abandonment, things like that. When we realize like, okay, well, the answer that I thought I was going to get, the responses that I thought I was going to get is not, it's not adequate. It's not here. It's not going to help heal me. So what do I do outside of that? Right. And so I think that's so good that you were able to then again, go through your own self-discovery process. I think I just have one last question because I know we've spoken a lot about your story and how your dad was not physically present. But I think when we talk about how you like to debunk these myths and how society has viewed fatherless daughter relationships and things like that, I thought it was interesting that something I came across was that, there is no significant change in how adverse behaviors or impact is created within children or women in terms of fathers being physically absent versus being psychologically absent or emotionally absent, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's still the same effect they have. So I think the thought process is that for people that have two parents in the household, then those children, those women have a better experience. Whereas in reality, the research has shown that they similarly have the same experiences. They similarly have the same response to self-esteem issues
Right.
or relationships, things like that. Is that something that you have also noted or observed in your some of your client relationships?
Actually, yeah. And so the way I always describe fatherlessness is that it's on a spectrum, and it can go from your father being absent to your father being physically there but emotionally unavailable. And within that spectrum, we also have death as well. Like, some things are active in terms of the father not wanting to be there, and then things that are outside of his control, like death, but it still is, fatherlessness at the end of the day because your father isn't there. And
Yeah.
so women whose father is absent have a similar experience in terms of their self-esteem, in terms of their fear of rejection and abandonment, in terms of their overextending themselves in relationship, being prone to promiscuity, needing self-validation, and a whole host of other things, as women whose father is in the home, but they are emotionally unavailable. If your father does not intentionally try to form a relationship with you outside of being just present and being
Mm-hmm.
like, the man of the house, and you do not engage with him in any way, he is not curious about who you are. He does not understand, what you like, what you don't like. He does not take you out on dates. There is no personal relationship that you have with him outside of seeing him come home from work or seeing him about, in the home on the weekend or whatever it is. Your experience is very, very similar to that of a woman whose father was never there at all. And
Mm,
that is a huge misconception that people have, because a lot of women believe that because their father was in the home, that they are not fatherless. And they
right.
don't understand that, the lack of relationship that they have with their father has caused the same type of relational issues that they have with other men, that
Mm-hmm.
a woman who has not had an experience with her father at all. And
Yeah.
so that's one of the things that I really like to make clear from the very beginning whenever I'm speaking to clients or speaking about this topic in general, because 84 million women self-identify as fatherless daughters, and a
Mm,
large percentage of that, their father was in the home. And so we have to really understand that, the relationship that you have, not just you being physically there, is what causes your coping mechanisms. Imagine you being a young child wanting to get your father's attention and he just can't ever be bothered. Like,
mm,
that is now going to be something that you're going to always be looking for in relationships with others. Someone who is paying attention to you, someone who's going to validate you in ways that your father never did. And
mm,
so if you start to look at your behaviors and whatnot, in terms of you maybe always wanting to be the center of attention, being upset when somebody else is getting attention, if your boyfriend's focus is not on you, all of a sudden you're going ballistic and what
yeah.
have you, like, and all these little microaggressions that may happen. You got to think about, well, why is that? Like, why do I feel that if I don't have 100% of somebody's attention all the time, that they may leave, or that I don't have value, or that I'm being ignored, or whatever it is, because there's a root cause to that. And a lot of it could very well be, your lack of relationship with your father.
Mm, mm. So good. So good. Look, I know there's so many other questions. There's so many other myths that we could probably debunk in this
Yeah.
episode. But I think, look, we're gonna probably have to bring you back. They're gonna have to come in and just book a session with you. I know you
Yeah.
have a relationship autopsy, which I love the name of that. That's pretty cool.
Thank you.
And I'm gonna drop all of the links to you in your in the show notes. So
Okay.
people who would like to get in touch with you, they can. Is there anything else you want to share in terms of what you do for your clients before we close out?
Yeah, absolutely. What I want women who are listening to this episode to know is that they deserve amazing relationships. And it starts with cultivating a amazing relationship with themselves. And so a part of the work that I do is just helping them to do that by understanding the root causes of their father relationship or lack thereof, and how it has presented itself in their current relationships. And when we do that work, like, you get to understand everything that you need to understand about yourself, because
Mm-hmm.
that is where the genesis of everything begins. Regardless of what's happening outside of you or with other people, you have to understand who you are, what you need, and how to advocate for yourself, as you said earlier today. And
Yeah.
so if we're not able to do that, we cannot expect to have amazing relationships with others, because we won't know what to tell them. We won't know what it looks like. We won't even know, like, what we're looking for or why we attract the things that we do. And
Right.
that's the reason why I came up with the training Relationship Autopsy, because it shows you how to look for the patterns in your relationships currently, so that you
Mm-hmm.
know exactly what you don't want, and how to start to move towards the types of relationships that you do. And so anyone who is looking to engage with me at all, I would say to start there with the Relationship Autopsy training.
Mm-hmm.
You can find the link to that in my bio on Instagram at Bernadette N. Jackson. Everything that I do is linked in the bio there. And so if you start there and you would like to have a clarity session with me afterwards, in terms of us just going through what you've discovered in that relationship autopsy exercise, I do offer that for free at the end of that training. So feel free to let me know that you're interested in that, and we can move forward, because I just want everyone who is a fatherless daughter to know that they deserve amazing relationships, and start to do the work to get there, because that's really what you have to do. You have to take ownership. You have to do the work.
That's right. You have to do the work. No one is going to do it for you, and they can't do it for you. Like you
Right.
say, you
Right.
have to know what it is that you want, what it is that you need, in order to expect that from someone else, right? So this has been so good, Bernadette. I like to end my episodes with rapid value questions.
Mm.
I always say that my guests always provide all of this value as it is. And so the rapid value questions is really just the cherry and the ice cream on top. And so I know you will be no different here with all this good information. So it's 4 questions. Really, again, just no right or wrong answers. It's whatever is the first thing that comes to the top of your mind. Okay.
Okay.
So first question is, what is one thing that you like to do to sustain or reset your peace?
I take opportunities to really be by myself. That helps me to recharge. And in
Mm-hmm.
those times, I give myself permission to do nothing at all, or to do an activity that I really love. I don't judge what I need in that moment. I just honor the request that I'm making to myself. And I feel at peace after I'm usually done with those sessions with myself.
Yes, yes. I love it. I love it. Agree 100%. Number 2, name one book or song that's helped you to define peace.
Hmm. A book or a song. It's not so much a book or a song as it is a quote that I read a few years ago. And in essence, what it said is that peace is not something external. It is something that's within, so that regardless of the chaos happening around you, you can still be
Mhm.
peaceful in the middle of the storm. So that's something that's helped me to define peace.
Yes, yes. Oh, awesome. So that may go into what the next question is how do you define peace for yourself now?
Peace for me is it's me being authentic in the moment, as well as um, honoring the requests that I make to myself. I find that those two things really do contribute to my peace. And I
Mm-hmm.
realize that outside of myself, like I don't have any control. And so the only thing I can control is my responses to things.
Right.
And in my interactions with people, I 9 times out of 10 choose growth and not having to explain myself and or this burden of people needing to know my side of the story. I
Yeah.
choose peace in that way a lot of times. So that would be my explanation at this season in my life.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I love it. I love it. Last question is a fill in a blank. It's three blanks. The first one is easy because it's your name. It is my name is blank, and without peace, I'd probably be blank, but with peace, I am blank.
Okay. My name is Bernadette, and without peace, I would be bitter.
Mm.
But with peace, I know that I can confidently walk in my purpose and feel fulfilled.
Yes, yes, confidently walk
Yeah.
in the purpose. That's the key there. Oh my gosh, I love it. Thank you so, so much, Bernadette. This has been such an impactful and enrichful conversation. And I love you and I love the work you're doing and keep doing your thing, girl. Thank
Thank you. I
you.
love you too. That I love this conversation so much. Thank you for having me on.
Of course. Love you.
Love
Bye.
you. Bye.
Ooh wee. I hope you all were somewhere that you could listen to this episode and really soak it in like you weren't multitasking like I know some of us are guilty of doing because man oh man was that good. I mean, Bernadette just really broke down how we sometimes translate the behaviors of our fatherlessness and into our new relationships, whether it is romantic relationships, whether it is work relationships, whatever, it translates, right? And so I love how she went into how it even affects the grieving process for children and the expectations that single mothers, particularly for those children, those women that fathers were not present in the home, how they may provide some expectations to children without realizing it's not giving them the opportunity just to grieve how they're feeling of this parent not being present, right? Having to take on these additional responsibilities. And I think that's so good to note, particularly if you are a fatherless daughter or you are someone that is the parent of a fatherless daughter, right? It's such good notes, things that she, recognized as emotional detachment and just kind of recognizing some of those behaviors and triggers, right? So important, right? Just a good episode. As I mentioned before, you all can get in touch with Bernadette a number of ways. She has her relationship autopsy, which I will drop in the show notes. And that way, if you feel this is something that was valuable, that you need to get in touch with her, that your fatherlessness has affected your relationships, absolutely reach out to Bernadette. Okay. Separately, if you enjoyed this episode, if you found it to be beneficial and helpful, please subscribe, please rate, please review, please share this, right? Y'all probably get tired of me. I sound like a broken record by now, but sharing is caring, right? It is so wrong of us to just kind of hoard the information for ourselves or even sharing because we think, well, we don't want other people to know that we identified with this episode because it'll maybe let people know how we're feeling or things that we've been through, right? It's not about that. Ain't nobody worried about that. Just share the information, right? If you think it'll help, if it helped you, it's likely going to help someone else, right? So definitely share. And also, I'd love to know some takeaways, right? What are some key takeaways that you may have gathered from this? Absolutely drop it on the comments, slide in my DMs, whatever it is. I'd love to know from you what are some key takeaways that you got from this episode. And also, again, I have a Facebook community as well for Peace Pursuits. That's another way that we can discuss some of those key takeaways. We discuss a little more in depth the episodes, etc. So I'd love to have you be officially a member of the Peace Pursuits community. Come on over and join us. That link is also in the show notes, as well as other ways to just contact me in general, whether it is by email, whether it is on my social media, or if it is to book a private consultation with me. I would love to speak to you and learn how we can help each other, and more importantly, empower you to transform conflict to peace in your professions and personal relationships. So with that being said, my loves, I hope that you have an amazing rest of your day, week, whatever it is by the time you're listening to this. And above all else, I want you to live your best life and embody peace without ever compromising your authentic identity. Love, light, and especially peace. Later, y'all.